Well, welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to another film rant. And this time, it's not necessarily we're talking about films or an actual film. We're talking about the film industry, and it's something that affects movies. And in this case, I'm talking about how film studios and companies, quote-unquote, test their film with test audiences, and my problem with the test audience procedure. Now, my problem is not that studios use some sort of scientific method to try to determine whether their film is going to be good or not. It's actually a pretty good ideal. Let's show our film to individuals, try to get some feedback, and we can maybe make some adjustments, change pacing, add some scenes, help determine the audience or marketing. My formal background in education is as a social scientist. I have a bachelor's degree in political science, and I have a master's degree in public policy. So the ideal of being able to interpret people's feelings, which some people immediately criticize doing test audiences for, is the ideal. Oh, you can't determine, emotions and turn them into numbers. As someone who studied the field, well, yes, you can. It's very easy to do. It's not that hard at all. Some people don't like that because they don't like the idea that people can actually really understand you better than you can understand yourselves. I'm comfortable with it. But my problem within the film industry is that it's not done very well. And there's a couple of things. One, it's the methodology, and two, it's how it's interpreted. I'll get into the methodology first, I think, because it'd help lay the groundwork of several problems. Now, ideally in social science, if you're studying, let's say, an election, you want an idea of how this candidate, is this a good candidate? How is he appealing to the public? How are the campaign ads going to turn out? There is a lot of ways to do this. But it's all very heavily peer-reviewed a lot of times. So there's a lot of independent organizations that go and do their own thing. And there's a heavy academic presence, so that the companies and the practitioners in there do, even if their individual private results are somewhat not public knowledge, how should I put it? They're known, they have to do other work. That's part of the nice thing, I guess, about elections, is they only come, the major ones, every 4 or 2 years if you're going for Congress. So that these guys got to do stuff in the meantime, so they normally put out other papers, so that they're known if they're good or bad. And because there's independent polling going on, there is something that their results can be checked against, and that forces those type of companies that do this research a check. You can't. Well, I suppose you can sometimes turn in results that are way, way off, and normally the candidates are going, why is everyone else saying that this is not going to happen? There's no function like that in film studios when they do their surveying. I mean, the only result is afterwards, after it's released to the public. And even when that happens, you can make up 1,000 different excuses as to why a film didn't perform well. Well, the company can, hey, we didn't mess up. It was your advertising campaign. You needed to do more. Or, it wasn't our fault per se. The film's still good. It's just, that other movie that came in #1. It's just, we can't anticipate that there would just be this other movie that just blow us away. And sometimes those are legitimate. There's certainly been movies I've enjoyed that never made it to #1 because of poor marketing, or because they were released when they had competition. I think the Tom Jane Punisher movie is a good example. It was released on the same weekend as Kill Bill. Both films are great, but obviously Kill Bill is much more well known because it appealed to more people, I guess. But here's what I was getting to with the methodological problems that are often you can find in these. For when I was talking about doing these political surveys, they have really, really, really large sample populations, and because of that heavy pressure to make sure the audience is, or their sample population is both large enough and it's random enough. Hence, they'll do the phone surveys. You've probably had one or two of these calls before. It doesn't fall under the do not call list, but they call a lot of people. You've been contacted probably by one of these organizations. That's a great way to keep in check. For a nationwide survey, you want a population, like the United States, of about 1,500 to 2,000 people is about all you need. You can do more, but it doesn't make your survey any more accurate. And to explain that would require going into the years of statistical research that's going in. Just even though it's there's 300 million people, once you get to about 1,500 or 2,000 people, as long as it's a fairly random survey, i.e., or the population is somewhat randomly selected, it's good enough to go. The problem with the movies is they don't get that check. They're often done by only a couple hundred people at most. Sometimes it's only like one viewing. Like they'll do to 60 people. That's partially because of the nature of the setup, and they're also not randomly selected. So let me explain that in two parts. One, it's obviously very hard to sit down people in theaters throughout the country and ask them like how this and ask them all these survey stuff after watching a 2-hour-long movie. Theaters don't want to have to rent out the space for having in like one town having like 2 people watch a movie normally for free, an incomplete movie for free, and then of course you're gonna have to have people taking the time to do all this questioning and stuff afterwards. So it's hard for them to do that. It's expensive. Now, if they really could, they probably could get a couple thousand applicants, but at the same time, they don't want too many people to see it because that's going to spread. If it is a bad film, it'll spread the word around a lot. It's easier if it's only 1 or 200, probably more like 160 to 100 people. It's hard to spread out that much because there's odds are going to be not that much confirmation. Like if a couple thousand people see a film and they all say it's horrible, then it's going to get spread really quickly around the internet. So I mean that's a downside of that. You'd think maybe that's the studio's thought. So that's one of the reasons. It's also cheap, and it takes a long time to be able to do something like that. Proper surveys might take a month to compile. It takes a very good. I've worked for during when I was in college. One of my summer jobs one year was I worked for a survey company because I had the background in it, and that was like one of the things is they would be doing those phone calls for weeks just to gather that. And for a lot of studios, they don't have that. They don't think they don't want to spend the time to do that much work on doing one of these test audience surveys. They also then there's all the argument against, oh well, these people saw it by themselves in like a TV. We want the theater experience type deal. So there's another reason. So right there, first problem, we don't have a large enough sample population to actually justify the results of whatever test you do. The other problem is it's not random. And what I mean by random is you have to have some sort of element that's going to be a random group of people. That's going to also represent. So you're going to have some people that live in cities, some people that live in suburbs, some people that are out in rural areas in geographically diverse forms. Now sometimes this is done by they don't call every area randomly, but they select certain areas. Like they may diversify where they're testing people from in some way. Like they might go, well, we're not going to do complete random phone calls, but we'll narrow down the area code that's so that a couple of them, like a third of them, will be in these 2 rural districts that are like halfway across the country, and one will be from the East Coast. They'll do something to somewhat keep that in check. Oftentimes, this is done at a mall in and around LA. Studio will rent out a theater for the day, and then they'll send out people to actually, if you've been to LA, and you've been in a mall, sometimes you get this offer. They go, hey, we've got a new movie starring Brad Pitt. You want to come and see it? It's a test screening, it's free, and right there, you probably saw the first one. If it's only in LA, that means the audience is going to reflect LA's tastes, and only LA's tastes. Now, certainly, if you want to have that element, if you're doing an overall survey of movies, but LA and people from New York, for example, very different even though they're urban, let alone suburbanites and people in rural areas. Even people in rural areas can vary different. It can vary drastically different. If you're talking about, rural Pennsylvania's got probably very different attitudes than rural Kentucky or rural Arkansas. So we've got that whole issue. So it's really, we're only getting the opinions of people within LA. And now this is one where a lot of people probably didn't pick up on. You're going up to people in a mall, asking them without planning, oh, hey, you want to spend this 2-hour long, probably 3 after the survey part too. I want to spend 3 hours all of a sudden to go and do this survey. Right there, who's going to say yes on the spot? Because most people have got stuff to do. Like maybe you're in the mall, but you've got to go to work in an hour and a half. Or, you're kind of just jumping in there for a quick hour-long lunch break. You're not going to be able to stay and watch a movie. Other things like, well, I got to go to dinner later tonight or something along those lines. So it's a big question of who's the people that say yes to this, I'm going to spend 3 hours to go do this. And the answer is somewhat we really don't know. Because for the most part, studios, and this is what I was talking about, academic peer review before, these companies never reveal the results, like what the population, a lot of times with these surveys that are political, because there's so much academic presence within that particular field and there's so much independent academic work going on, that a lot of these companies do feel compelled to, in order to legitimize themselves, reveal their numbers, reveal their raw numbers, and show us, oh, hey, they'll remove the names and people will be assigned random numbers for their subjects, but other groups can go and check their numbers, and this is, for them, this is the way to legitimize themselves. Our results are like this. Look at the population we have. Now, sometimes they don't. It makes people kind of bat their eyes a bit. But since the only person or people that's because it's done in political field, is because it's partially used to persuade people. Everyone else is voting for our candidate. You should too. So the very fact that this is like a provable fact, they want to be able to do that. Here in the studios, it's only for studio consumption. It's only for the executives and the producers to kind of look and see and digest, so they don't care about releasing those numbers to the overall public. They don't normally show the results of these surveys. It's only for them, and therefore the companies that do it consider it confidentiality, and they protect it. So we don't know for sure. There are rumors that some people have said, a couple have been, often that it's, a lot of times for these movies, it's a lot of older people. Movies, an audience that it's not aimed at. So these people are going to go watch, let's look over here, see something relatively new. Oh, yeah, like imagine a bunch of older people going in to watch, I just lost track of the movie I was going to do. So I'm looking at my shelves of films. Sin City. There we go. Like, imagine people going in to watch, like older folks going in to watch Sin City or Sucker Punch. A film like that. Now, you can argue, oh, those films suck or whatever, but it's so out of probably the taste of people in their 60s, 70s. There's a few that do like that. I've certainly seen them at those type of films. But they've got the time to say, 3 hours, I'm retired, I'm not doing anything. They've got the time to do that. So you've got a lot of that, limited audience, that limited 60 to 100 people often. Well, they're just going to what? They're going to reflect their own personal views. it's not my taste. So they're going to give a lot of times negative attitudes. If let's say this is a film that's really made for younger folks, and so they put a gay character in there. A larger fraction of older folks are going to be offended by that character, and so the results for that might come back that people don't like that character. It's really just because it's an older generation doesn't like it. But if you're aiming it at, let's say, the film's mostly going to be viewed by 20-year-olds when it's released, well, they're not going to mind as much, or they might actually enjoy that character even more. So, there's that problem. Then, the other problem is you can wait and adjust for that. There are ways of... Basically what it means is waiting is you give more value to than people that are in their 20s than you do to people in their 80s. So there's a statistical way around that, but like I said, it's already a small population, so you get only, out of that audience of 60 people, or we'll go with 100 people, we'll say that 60 of them are over 60. And out of the people that are 20s, we'll say 18 to 25 years old, there's only 20 of those people. The rest are adults in between 60 and 25, or 60 and 30. So now you're basing almost your entire sample population is made up of only about 20, 25 people. There is no statistician in the world that's going to say, oh yeah, that's great, that'll reflect it. Mind you, 20, 25 people, all from the same city, all probably from the same neighborhood of that same city if they're from in that mall. And that's what you're going to base. For a lot of these studios, that's what they wind up doing, basing their decisions on what's needed. So that becomes very, very tough. Now you're starting to see where the problem with some of these test audiences are for. Now, some directors are actually have, just because they've proven themselves enough, and they know the kind of the BS that happens as a result, they can break away from this. They can break away. They don't do the test screenings because they have the clout to push back against the studio. And it's great when that happens, but a lot of times it doesn't. So this is on the technical, methodological end. Now, the other problem is, even with the political stuff, they'll normally release the survey. Or when people are asked questions, it's known what questions are asked, what order. And therefore, if there's a survey that gets released and it's got, let's say, there are ways you can manipulate, even within a survey, to get people to answer certain things. The academic community and the other side of the political spectrum there will call the BS out, and it will delegitimize that survey to a great degree. Again, because this is internal consumption only by the studios, this is how it works. After they sit down and view the... Actually, I think this is a good point to explain now how the actual process works. So after you're approached in this mall and asked to go see this movie, starring whoever, you sit down, and then a lot of times people will come out. Stars from the movie will come out. The director will come out and talk to you, and normally they try to explain it's an incomplete movie, there's going to be incomplete special effects, which that alone can help really cause problems for movies often. And this by the fact that lighting isn't done right, or certain effects aren't done properly yet, or there's not a filter that will remove obvious makeup lines and such. So right there you have people, even though you're telling them not to grade it on that, it's still going to affect them. So you still might get some negative feedback when you shouldn't. Anyway, they do that, you watch the movie, and then what they'll do is then they'll pass out. There's a couple of ways to do that. One, whenever they see something, there's one method where everyone in the studio gets basically a little buzzer, and they'll press the buzzer whenever something they like happens, or whenever something they don't like happens. It varies a bit. That's one methodology. The other methodology is to then actually give them a questionnaire after the movie's complete. That'll ask him, what do you think of this character? What do you think of that character? Yada, yada, yada. How is the editing? How is the pacing? And the questionnaire is probably the toughest, is the one that can affect films dramatically from the studio's perspective, and yet at the same time there can be so many flaws in that. And I'll kind of point out how there's the way things are worded can dramatically affect how things are, how results happen, or how people word it. You have to word stuff in a way that people will respond. Like if you go, I'm trying to remember an example off the top of my head because I hate this. I've read several books on this subject, and now I'm trying to remember the subject, the actual problem. But there are certain ways you word questions to make sure they're not that biased. I'll skip that for now. There's also, along with that though, there's another methodological problem that often isn't addressed in a lot of surveys, and it also has to do with wording, and that's misinterpreting when people scale things. Like they'll go, on a scale from 1 to 5, what did you think of this character? And that actually is probably one of the best ways. Sometimes they'll go, how do you think of this character? Loathe him, disrespect, not liking him, neutral, like him, really, really like him, or something like that. And sometimes people will put down something in the middle. Well, I didn't feel one way or the other. And that'll get misinterpreted by the studio, because whatever wording sometimes they'll use makes it sound more negative. But for a lot of people, they ignore the wording and they just see, he was kind of middle of the ground, so I'll just put the middle of the ground answer somewhere in the center. And the way things are worded sometimes will completely affect how the studios will go, well, the audience says this character is less likable. But less likable could mean it's like third in, like 3 out of 5. Which means he's neutral, but the way when you say less likable and you say the audience thinks he's less likable, all of a sudden studios go, well, maybe we should cut that guy out. So right there, that's another problem you have with those surveys. Probably this putting 1 to 5 works. So even then, it's like, what does a 1 mean? There's all these problems, and believe me, it's head scratching. You're kind of probably going, I thought this guy liked this stuff, but no, I mean it's tough. But a lot of when it's better peer reviewed, you have a lot of these problems normally adjusted for or handled. Sometimes not handled, but anyway. Now the other problem with doing this whole setup is, remember what I just talked about before? There is the director comes out. Well, not everyone's going to have the director come out or the star come out, and that can dramatically affect the movie in a couple of ways. One, by just having the director, writer, or actor come out and explain the movie to you, you're not getting the general audience's impression, because you're having like theme. They'll mention the theme of the movie. They'll mention maybe a quick plot synopsis, and that will help you dramatically in being able to follow the movie along. So if the movie is not as easy to follow, a lot of times by having the director there and explain stuff to people, it's now easier to follow than it would be if he wasn't there. Catch my drift? The other problem with that is, because the guy's physically there and he came out and talked to you, he probably had a few jokes, you like the guy, whether he's a writer, director, or actor, people are somewhat hesitant to give negative reviews. Like, let's say President Obama went down and they go, oh, we're going to survey how people are in rural Arkansas, an area that he's not necessarily that popular in. There's some pockets, yeah. But let's say you went down there and they went to ask him questions, get a survey of the population. And before that, though, he went out and he immediately shook hands with the local people. He talked about, hey, this and that. And then they go, oh, and by the way, now here, everyone, here's a survey, just a quick survey on how everything. What do you think of President Obama? Sure, a lot of people are still going to give negative reviews and such, but a lot of people are going to, what? I'm going to give this guy, I'm not going to, he seemed fine enough. I just saw him. I'm going to give him a 2 instead of a 1, or a 3 instead of a 2, or a 4 instead of a 3. They'll bump it up a little bit. They'll be a little bit hesitant. Some people will immediately go, well, I like the guy so much right now, I'm going to give him a 10 just because I just saw the guy. Meanwhile, if you interview the same person, that effect will quickly fade, and not everyone's going to get that opportunity to meet the actual director before seeing his film, or actor, or writer, or whatever. So that right there can skew things against an audience or against the film. So those are really just the methodological problems with just getting the data. The big one is, of course, the first thing I talked about. A lot of the other stuff is just minor. It'll bias stuff in a minor way. Sometimes in a more dramatic way. But the biggest thing is they don't have enough people take these test audiences, and they're not dispersed enough. Now, the other side of this is the interpretation of the information by studios. The problem with oftentimes these surveys is that the studio executives can use them almost like a crutch, an excuse to get away with doing whatever they want to have get done. It's a way for them to protect themselves against, if there is something bad happens, well, they can point to the survey and go, listen, I just followed the results that I was being told. Obviously, we need to reevaluate what firm we hire, or something along those lines. Something really bombs, like the John Carter movie or something. I'm sure an executive was able to point to, well, the test audiences really, really like the film, so it's not my fault. Don't look to be firing me. And that works fine. It's a great protector, but because of that, they often have to then follow suit on what is said in those surveys, and sometimes they just they don't understand what stuff means. One of the classic examples of that is, that I can think of right off the top of my head, is the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, Next Generation, I believe it was. And that was a movie where they had this one character who, I forget his name, he was like the one random black guy in the movie, that they then, originally he died in a very badass way, and the audience, when they get the test audience, they said that they really wanted him to live. And so the studio went back and they made him live, and then it kind of just ruins the ending. It ruins that character, and that's what we're going with when I say it's the studio's fault. Films are supposed to be emotional roller coaster rides. That's when you get a really good result from a movie. It's when it's emotional. It draws an emotion out. It makes you interested, vested. It brings attention. So, and part of that is killing characters you want to have live. In a lot of films, that's really good. And even though you'll be like, oh, if only that guy lived, the overall opinion, though, is that you really enjoy that movie. It's kind of like Game of Thrones. Oftentimes somebody dies, you're like, oh, I wish that guy lived. They could have done so much more. And even though I'm kind of disappointed that that character, like, spoiler alert, Ned Stark, Sean Bean, doesn't live throughout the first season, you still have the opinion, you still like the movie overall. So a lot of times it's like these little things that people wish were changed individually, but the overall effect of them is actually, they have a much more positive reaction from the film, because it is a tearjerker. It's a movie. Like, some people even complain in horror movies that it was terrifying. It was scary. I was frightened from this. And sometimes that's the purpose. It's when you try to quantify and you get away from what the artistic purpose of the film is. And this has happened where studios had tried to tune down like the horror and the spookiness of a horror film because the test audience found it spooky, when that's exactly what its purpose is supposed to be. Or, it's a film that's supposed to disturb you. And they go, well, audiences are really disturbed by this movie. And it's like, yeah. So that's another big problem with the test audiences, is how the studios react to them. The big ones are the ones like I just said. They use the excuse that people are not liking certain characters, so we should show them less, when they're not supposed to like a character, or that the character should live, but then we lose that emotional impact and it becomes a rather generic, forgettable film. So it's that artistic level that gets really hurt by these, and that's one of the reasons why filmmakers really hate them. It's because a lot of times it is the fact that the test audiences don't get it, but the overall audiences would. Again, that goes back to the methodology. What are they getting if you're having a hard R horror movie and it's the people you're getting there are not horror fans, which actually happened. There was one example when the movie Seven was shown to test audiences. At the time, the Brad Pitt and Martin Freeman were not known to do anything that dark. They were romantic movies. So when they were told that the movie was starring Brad Pitt or whatever, audiences weren't expecting that at all. So they had a completely different expectation for the film. And if you get a film doesn't have horror fans in it, well, horror fans are the ones that go see a horror movie. So I'm sorry, Grandma, but if you're not, there are some grandmas that do enjoy going to see that stuff. But if you don't like that type of stuff and find it distasteful, you weren't going to go see that movie in the first place. So that's also the other part. Even if you go for a random survey, you're not necessarily getting the film-going public, the public that's willing to shell out money to go see the film. Even among those younger people, because maybe a lot of the people that said they had the 3 hours to burn are people that aren't working right now. So they would just want to kind of the mall to hang out, maybe grab a quick bite, but normally they don't have it in the budget to go to the movies a lot. And therefore they're going to be somewhat different than the population that does have the money to go see a film every week, and it's going to be the general film-going audiences. So that's another problem right there that I have. Now that I've spent like a half hour trashing the process, I will give some defense to it. Sometimes it can be used to defend against studio interference. That's when executives at the studio make really crappy decisions and try to force it onto a film. One example was G.I. Joe, not Retaliation. G.I. Joe, we've gone into G.I. Joe Retaliation before. But The Rise of Cobra is one of the executives just didn't get Snake Eyes as a character and thought he was unlikable, and tried to have him almost cut out of the film completely, even though he's like most people enjoy him. When they did the test audience, even though he wasn't part of the selection, he was selected as the audience's favorite character. At that point, that executive backed off. So there are some times where this can work to keep away. It's also very effective at just getting an overall picture. Is this film edited right? Is the audience getting the message across? Or more importantly, are they getting the plot? Does the plot make sense to a general audience? It's very easy for people working on a film that's been working on it for 2 years to not pick up when it's being too subtle. For example, I can think of one where this I think was more of them figuring this out in editing. But in Escape from New York, there was one scene where one of the characters, she was killed and run over on the bridge trying to escape from the city. Except when it wasn't quite clear. I believe this wasn't a case of studio audiences doing this, but I don't think. But as they were editing, they were realizing, it's really not that clear. I mean, yeah, we see her hit, but we never see her again. And so they decided to do a reshoot where they actually just on the floor of John Carpenter's garage, just like took the actress in, put some blood like behind her head, lay down, and then like had a 2-second shot, so it's as clear to the audience. Yeah, that character is dead now. And studio audiences, or not studio, but test audiences can pick, are very good at picking that stuff up. Are very good for going, I don't know where is this character now in relation to that character, or this is so choppy. I don't know why this person, or what happened to that guy we saw 10 minutes ago, or I don't know why they're going here. I don't know why they're leaving this city and going to this farm. Which is very helpful. That means you can do the reshoots and establish sometimes where people just have those clunky lines going. We're gonna drive out. My uncle owns or we'll say it's like a mob movie. It's like, I did some research and Topanga had a farm out here. I'm sure this might be where he's hiding the bodies. Adding stuff like that in, it helps. I mean, even if you could probably guess, there's been a lot of times where that really has helped films, and that's really where this can shine, especially in the editing. If you need to do pickup shots, if you need to clear up some dialogue, unconfuse things, it works wonders for that. It does. It has its place. It's just a matter of really the BS that gets put into it by executives, by the fact that it's not more peer reviewed. If I had to make a suggestion, I would say these companies should have to give out their data. Let us see your data, sir. And it would probably be for the better. Although at the same time, most of these companies would probably be extremely embarrassed, and they wouldn't want to do that. Like I said, for the big one of just the sample size. Actually, it would be probably a little bit excused for that because they're given a budget to do this in, and we did as much as we could on the budget they gave us. But there would be a lot of serious questions going, hey, people would probably bring up, why aren't you asking people what their favorite genres are? Which hopefully some of these companies are. Again, this is stuff we don't know because they don't release this information. It turns out you have an audience that are full of people that love romantic comedies, and they're watching a science fiction horror film. Maybe that'll go over well, but at the same time, if it doesn't go over well, is that because the people we got to go see this film don't fit our profile, and therefore they're not the type of people we're going to get to go see this film in the first place when we do the advertisements? Now, sometimes it'll go, hey, the people that like the romantic comedies like this movie, so maybe we should put our trailer in front of some romantic comedies. Either way, it's a problem, and this is why BS like what happened with G.I. Joe Retaliation, its delay, highly unusual. I think that was showing the kind of panic that was going on in Hollywood at that time. But it's my problem with the whole process. That is it for now. Sorry for the delay in. I wasn't going to go out and see Jurassic Park. Why? Because I have Jurassic Park, and I heard the 3D wasn't that great on it. It was typical. So I didn't see Jurassic Park 3D this week. I will, however, be seeing Oblivion when it comes out, probably on Friday. So I'm looking forward to that. Looks really good. Then it's going to be a little bit of, I guess, another hiatus. Maybe we'll get some other stuff reviewed in the meantime. But, yep. If you liked the review, please subscribe, like, all that fun stuff. Spread the word. If you didn't, tell me why. Always interested in the feedback. Signing off for now. Hasta luego, film fans.